Okay. Let's start out with if you could just give us kind of a brief rundown of what you were doing in early '64, how you first heard the Beatles, and what happened when they came to Miami.
When I first heard the Beatles was a Saturday. I was on WQAM in 1963. I moved from WIOD to WQAM. QAM was the big rock and roll station in South Florida. There were two of them, essentially, QAM and FUN, and QAM was more often than not the leader. So in 1964, I was there, and it was a Saturday afternoon, and we got a special delivery from Capitol Records. I was on the air in the afternoon, 3 to 7, something like that, and I called Jim Dunlap, who was the program director, and said, hey, I've got a special delivery thing here for you from Capitol Records. It's the record, the first release in the United States, or on Capitol, from this new group that we had heard about, the Beatles. And he says, oh, great. He's, we've been reading about them in Billboard and Cashbox and all of this, and Capitol obviously was doing the big hype routine because they saw the successes in England and Germany, and they want to duplicate that in the United States, because you really were not a rock and roller unless you made it in the good old US of A. So he says, well, take it out of the special delivery envelope or whatever and put it on the radio. I'll go turn the radio on and we'll listen to it together. So, of course, it was I Want to Hold Your Hand, and I took it out and queued it up and got it ready to go. Introduced it, did a little rap about, hey, this is a new group from England and blah. And probably 20 seconds into the record, the phones exploded. Just boom! Never saw anything like it. And everybody said, what? Who is that? What is that? What's the name of it? Would you play it again? And it got to the point where that afternoon, I think I played it probably every half hour, just based on the number of requests and what was going on the telephone. It was a phenomenon, the likes of which I had never seen before. I've been playing tunes in this town for 30 years next year. Once, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, somebody called and requested the national anthem, and once did the telephones respond to a new song like that, I Want to Hold Your Hand. I think the whole chronology of events that really made the Beatles happen is a kind of an interesting one. And, they say hindsight is the only perfect science, but looking back on what happened and when it happened and how it happened, it was really the assassination of John Kennedy that opened the door that previously had been closed to the Beatles. They put out their first single in the United States in 1963. It was a bomb. It would become a hit later, but it was a bomb first time out of the box. So why was that? My answer to that question is we weren't ready. It's a combination of right thing, right place, and right time. It was certainly the right thing. It was certainly the right place, but it was not the right time. We weren't ready in '63. The kids in this country, the teenagers in this country, had a relationship with John Kennedy that was unlike any other president who ever lived, for a lot of reasons. One, he was young, he was attractive, he had a great sense of humor, and two, he knew how to use television. He was the first president to do televised press conferences. So the kids knew him. They felt like, he was their uncle or brother or something like that. And when he was killed, the kids were really depressed. They went into a state of depression nationwide. We saw it. We felt it. And that was in November, so we went through Thanksgiving, went through Christmas, went through New Year's, the holidays. And we got into 1964, and everybody kind of said, well, it's done. We can't bring him back. Let's get on with the business of our lives and give me something new, give me something different, give me something fresh. Now it was time. And I Want to Hold Your Hand was the catalyst, the first musical connection that we had with this thing that was to become Beatlemania.
All right, so now we're in the beginning of '64. Mm-hmm. They're getting ready to come to the States.
Right.
What was QAM doing when the Beatles were on the way to the States?
Well, first thing that any rock and roll radio station did when we found out about the Beatles tour, first tour in the United States, was to find out whether or not they were coming to your market, because you could probably dump half your audience overnight if you let the competition get one up on you, and they bought all the tickets, and like that. We did, for example, buy all of the tickets to every Wometco theater in Dade-Broward County for the first showing of A Hard Day's Night. Bought them all. That's how powerful the Beatles were. So we heard they were coming to the United States, but they were not coming to South Florida. They would be here briefly to tape some shows at the Deauville for Ed Sullivan, but they would not appear publicly. There was no place you could go to buy a ticket and see the Beatles in South Florida. So we said, okay, second choice would be what? And we looked at the itinerary and found that they were going to perform in the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville. So what we did is we went out and chartered a National Airlines then DC-8. It had 128 seats on it. We took 6 disc jockeys and probably 5 or 6 other people from the radio station and set those tickets aside, and then gave away the rest of them on the air as prizes to people who wanted to go to Jacksonville on our charter flight to see the Beatles. Just as a kind of an interesting aside, the other radio station, WQAM, chartered a Constellation. Constellation is a propeller-driven airplane, and it takes like 5 hours to fly to Jacksonville. Well, a DC-8 is a turbojet, and it takes like an hour and a half. And didn't we have some fun with that on the radio? So anyway, we go to Jacksonville. I was one of the chaperones of a bunch of the kids who had won, and adults too, who won tickets to the concert. And whoops, excuse me. Hello. Yeah. Yes.
Meanwhile, back in Jacksonville.
So we fly to Jacksonville, and we're acting as chaperones for the people who won tickets on this flight, and we're seated on the football field, the floor of the Gator Bowl. Okay. And they had the stage set up at one end of the Gator Bowl, which was almost like sitting inside of a speaker, because the kids you were surrounded. We were down on the floor on the football field, and rising up on all 3 sides, behind you and on the left and the right, were the stands, which were full of screaming kids. I have never in my life heard the kind of sound that came down out of those stands that night. Ever. It was just incredible. I mean, we all looked at each other saying, what the hell's going on? You know? It was one of those. So, but, 20 minutes, 30 minutes before showtime, the Capitol Records promotion guy comes down to where we're seated and says, how would you like to meet the Beatles? And we all, are you kidding? So the 6 DJs who were there followed him underneath the stands. They had brought him in a trailer. And security was all over the place. I mean, it was state troopers and the Jacksonville police, and you had to show badges and ID and blah. I happened to be standing in the front of the line of the 6 of us as I walked in the trailer, and the first person I see is Ringo Starr. He's sitting there. Hello? Yes. Hey, James, how are you? Good.
Okay, so the first guy you saw was Ringo Starr.
So I walk into the trailer, and I'm ahead of the troops, and the first Beatle that I see is Ringo Starr. They're sitting there eating hamburgers and drinking Pepsis and getting ready to go out and rock and roll a little bit. And somebody introduces me, the Capitol guy introduces me to Ringo. Well, as we shake hands, Ringo sees my initial ring. I never thought about it. Rick Shaw, Ringo Starr, we have the same initials. And they called him Ringo because he was a ring freak. Well, he saw this initial ring, and he says, I want it. I want to buy that. How much do you want for it? And he goes into his pocket to pull out money. I said, Ringo, hold it. You know, it's my wife gave me this. If I come home without the ring, I'm dead meat and divorced, you know. But it was a great icebreaker. It brought that moment down to something real, and then there was John, Paul, and George, and all the rest of that. And we were in there for maybe 15 minutes and just kind of small talking. I mean, what do you say to the Beatles, you know? And this was so early in the Beatlemania phenomenon, I got the feeling they didn't really quite understand why this was happening. They knew what was happening. They were on the cover of Life. They were on all the TV shows. They had the top 5 songs in the world, and obviously everybody was at their feet. But they didn't know why. They couldn't quite formalize all of the things that happened that made this thing unfold the way it did. But it, of course, was one of the highlights of my rock and roll disc jockeying career to have met those guys.
Backstage there, did you have a chance to speak with Lennon? What were your impressions of him?
Very briefly. He was a lot more soft-spoken. I was kind of surprised at that. I remember because John, from all the things that we had heard and the interviews that we had seen, John had something to say about anything. He knew that because he was a Beatle, people would listen. And no matter what the subject was, whether it was free sex or love or how popular is Jesus versus the Beatles, he would expound on it until somebody shut him off, which wasn't often. I mean, John just had a knack for talking. And he was kind of the type of personality that was almost proud of his position, and he wanted to make everybody else aware of what his position on the issues was. But that night he was real quiet. He didn't have a whole lot to say for whatever reason. I don't know if he wasn't feeling well or whatever, but I was kind of looking for him to be a little more outspoken and gregarious than he was that evening.
How about Paul?
Paul was pretty much like I anticipated him being. The opposite of John, pretty much to himself, hey, how are you? Thanks for playing our records and this and that, and we've heard that you guys have done a great job for the Beatles in South Florida, and that was pretty much it. You know, Paul was Paul.
How about George?
George, I really don't have any clear-cut remembrances of George, and I guess that's kind of the way the Beatles stacked up in my memory. My favorite was always Paul. Second favorite was John, because they were the real creative driving force behind the Beatles. Third was Ringo. I always kind of liked Ringo because he kind of sat back there and played the drums. Not very well, but he sat back there and played the drums, and he was a Beatle, so it all worked out, you know. George, you know, when they split up, for example, everybody knew that Paul would have no problem. His career would continue to flourish, as would John's. But Ringo and George were the question marks. Could they do it without that aura of the Beatles? And, of course, history's proven that they could do it fairly well. I mean, they were all incredibly successful and still are, those who are still with us. But I don't have a particular clear memory of George that night for whatever reason.
All right, so back on the plane on the way back to Miami after
Yeah.
the Gator Bowl gig, what was the mood in the plane? How were the kids reacting to the whole thing?
The kids just absolutely flipped out. If you can imagine seeing the Beatles live, it's a once-in-a-lifetime shot. And then, of course, having been part of this chartered airline, jet flight, and then QAM radio station and all of that, there was a lot of adrenaline flowing that night. And then we announced on the intercom on the airplane on the way back that the following day, which was a Saturday, that it would be an all-Beatles Saturday hop. I had a dance show on Channel 10 in South Florida, which was the local American bandstand. And we made it an all-Beatles day in honor of the concert and the fact that we were there. And I got on television that day and told the story about Ringo and the ring, my initial ring. And it was like I became the Pope of South Florida instantly. All the girls wanted to kiss the ring that Ringo wanted to buy. You know?
God. All right, well, let's rewind a little bit to February '64 when they came down for the Ed Sullivan appearance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what did QAM and include FUN too, because you guys were doing the cross promotion,
Right,
and competing against each other. So they're coming down. They've arrived in New York, February 7th, 1964. Did Sullivan show up there? They're going to come down here the next weekend. What's happening?
Well, I was looking for it here is a record that we put out, a 45 of an interview that was done on the telephone when they were in the Deauville Hotel.
Charlie Murdoch interview?
Yeah, right.
I have that.
Okay, all right. They came in on National Airlines, Miami International Airport. I think I still have some film, some old black and white news footage of from Channel 10 who was out there. It was the very first time that a wireless microphone was ever used in South Florida. This now you got to remember, this is 1965. Okay, so you're talking a lot of years ago. It's like the Explorer thing that's out there doing Neptune now. Well, that thing was fired off 13 years ago. That's 60s technology. So wireless microphones were not something that you would find in every radio station like you might today. So we had this one on consignment. The guy who built it says, "Here, try this thing out, and if you like it, I'll give you a nice price on it." So we took the receiver for the wireless microphone, plugged it into a telephone, and just let the phone stay off the hook. We had one guy standing there on this payphone guarding the telephone hookup, which is where the receiver was. And the other radio station, FUN, is out there with their cable, the regular microphone with a cable going into it. Well, as sure as heck, as the fates would have it, here comes the DC-8, and it parks right opposite where we were. And they go out to the end of their cable, and they're still about 30 yards short. They can't get there from here. And we just keep on going, and there's no cable, and they're looking around saying, well, what's going on? How can they do this? You know? But it was the very first time that a radio station had a wireless mic on the air in South Florida. They came, they saw, they conquered. There's a guy by the name of Buddy Dresner, Sergeant Buddy Dresner of the Miami Beach Police Department, who was assigned the Beatles. And he was not into Beatlemania. He didn't really quite know who they were or what this whole thing was all about. But he got a real quick, down-and-hard education from the kids. Oh, yeah.
From his kids?
From his kids, right. He had, as a matter of fact, in this conversation that we taped from the Deauville on the telephone, Paul went out of his way to thank Buddy for having him over for chicken dinner and all of that stuff. It was a real American-style treat for these guys because they couldn't go anywhere. There were literally kids climbing up the walls, the side walls of the Deauville Hotel. The room where John Lennon slept has almost become a shrine. A wealthy Beatle freak has rented that room for the next 10 years. It's done deal. He's paid cash money up front, so he's got it. That's his room, the room where John Lennon slept in the Deauville Hotel. There were stories about the maids going up and grabbing the sheets and cutting them up in little bitty pieces and selling them for $10 a piece and stuff like that. And they're probably true. $10 would have been a bargain for a piece of John Lennon sheet in the Dovell back then. They got out a lot, and from all indications, really enjoyed South Florida. The stories that we heard back from the Beatles and who was that? Louise Harrison Caldwell, George Harrison's sister, where they really enjoyed South Florida. In fact, that was one of the things that came into play a little bit later when they decided to do Hard Day's Night in the Bahamas, because they liked it down here. It was a fun time for them.
You remember anything about them being out on the beach at Dovell?
No.
There were stories about them going out to try to catch a few rays on the beach and being mobbed by kids.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You know,
yeah, they couldn't go anywhere without serious protection. The fact they mentioned that in that conversation on the phone, that they wanted to thank all the people who were so kind to give their private facilities, swimming pools, beaches, things of that kind, so that they could go out and enjoy the sun, because they literally were prisoners in the hotel most of the time.
Yeah, I remember, in fact, I think it's in the same interview you're talking about, the phone interview, Lennon thanks them and says it was nice to be, oh no, he describes the house as not a regular house, but kind of a big house, Buddy's place.
Yeah.
It was nice to be...
Buddy.
It was nice to be in a non-hotel type environment, because at that point, as George Harrison said, they were living in a box.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, around the world in a box.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, so... okay, beyond the Gator Bowl and the Deauville situation, did you have any further encounters with any of the guys?
No, that was it. That's the only time that I ever crossed paths with them personally.
Any other parting shots about them?
Parting shots.
Let's talk about it from a perspective of 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, arriving in the States more, and in your response, say more than a quarter century ago, because this may air in next February, which will be 26 years
okay.
ago. So, talk about the legacy and 25 years later, quarter century later.
The impact that the Beatles had on us, not only because of their music, sociologically, the way we cut our hair, the clothes that we wore, because they were the Beatles kind of clothes. It was absolutely enormous. The only other rock and roller who could even come close would be Elvis Presley, and he was by himself, and there were four of them. Okay, so there's a big difference there. And when it happened, also, was very significant. It happened right in the middle of the most powerful decade in the history of rock and roll music. The song that was most played on the radio last year in the United States of America was Yesterday by the Beatles, and that's 25, 6, 7 years old. There's a message there, and a message, I think, is nothing a whole lot better has come along since, okay? And people said back in 70, when they all went their separate ways, don't worry about it, there'll be another Beatles. Wrong. Yeah, okay, yeah. When the whole Beatlemania juggernaut started to gain momentum, we saw it daily, nightly in my case, because I was on 7 to 11 at night on the radio, and we did a top 10 every night. Kids would call up and vote for their favorite song, and for weeks, I mean weeks on end, the number one song was Boys by Ringo and the Beatles. It was always, I mean 5, 6, 7 songs out of the top 10 were Beatles songs. And it got to the point where, as a disc jockey who made his living playing what people wanted to hear 4 or 5 hours a day, well, I was getting tired. I mean, I was really burning out on some of that stuff.
I'll never forget that. I mean, listening to that, and you know, you always made reference to the girls who were answering the phone and stuff. You know, like girls from the local high school.
Sure, right.
Probably the same girls that were on the TV show, which I'd like to ask you about. Still have fantasies going on about.
Sure, Patty Benson.
Patty Benson, geez. Okay, but I thought it was hilarious. You know, that the same tune would be number one night after night, and I always thought, forgive me, okay, but I always thought it was a conspiracy, that it was the girls who were answering the phone, who were rigging it, who were like loading the ballot box, stuffing the ballot box because they wanted to.
No, I don't think so. I think it was legit. The power they had over all of us. I once tried to figure out how many hours of my life have I spent listening to Beatle music. I mean, lots. You know, you stop and think about it. If you're on the radio for 4 hours a day and you lived through that whole experience from 64 to 70, you played a lot of Beatle tunes. Whether you liked it or not, I happen to like it. I think that they were, beyond any question of doubt, the most significant, the most influential group in the history of rock and roll contemporary music. No doubt about it. I mean, the records are there. Just take a look, you know. And it goes on unto this very day. Twist and Shout. I mean, all the rest of the killers that are still among the most requested oldies out there.
What was well, how do I put this? I don't want to sound like sycophantic or anything, but you had your own power in the marketplace. You were very much loved by the kids, you know, and they looked up to you a great deal. You were kind of a father figure in a lot of ways. Were you aware of that? Was that something that you...
Not as much then as I am now. I had no idea what was going on out there every night when I pushed the button that started Good Night, My Love. I had some stories that have come down since. We did the 20-year class reunion for Fort Lauderdale High School a couple of years ago, and it was on the roof of the Holiday Inn on Lauderdale Beach. Big room, and it has a glass window overlooking the beach. It was a beautiful night, full moon and all that. About halfway through the evening, a guy walks over and he says, "I got to tell you something." He says, "You are the honorary godfather of my daughter." And I said, "Well, I'm honored, but why? What did I do to deserve that?" He said, "Well, come here, I'll show you." And we walk over to the window overlooking the beach, and he says, "Do you see that palm tree down there?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "She was conceived right there at the base of that palm tree 13 years ago one night while we were listening to you play Good Night, My Love." He says, "You were there. You were there." And I was. I was in the back seat, and they were growing up, learning about life, love, and the pursuit of happiness, and I was on the radio, leading them through it. Somehow, some way, and these stories, the relationship that has evolved, because my thing here in South Florida is so unusual. It's 29 years now, and it'll be 30 years on the radio in South Florida next year. I really did grow up with these people, and they look at me like an uncle or a brother or something, because I was there. I was there when Kennedy got shot. I was there during 3 hurricanes. We've shared some good times. We've shared some bad times. But we've shared an awful lot of time, no matter how you slice it. And one of the most important things in life is consistency and dependability. They can depend on me, and God knows I've been consistent.
True. I'm sorry, I just noticed that letter with the Westwood One logo on there. That looks real familiar. The letter I wrote you a few years ago.
Yeah, you didn't sign your last name. It says Stephen. Oh, here it is. Right, there you go. Right. Well, I saved it.
that was my my rickshaw story.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I really appreciate you spending the time with me.
Hey, Stephen, my pleasure. Always.
We'll send you an air check.
Great.
Let me ask you about, you mentioned the footage you have from IOD.
Cool.
Do you have, is there any way I might be able to get some audio from that to augment this?
What it is, let's see, there are 2 things. One was a piece, I think, from Channel 10, and the other was a piece of Charlie Murdoch. Murdoch did a 8mm movie of 64, 65 QAM promotions with the Mustang and the Tiger.
Yeah, right.
We did go-kart races and drag races at Masters Field and a lot of stuff like that. And I have a copy, a video, the VHS video copy of it, which I'll be happy to make a copy for you if you like. And,
yeah, I'd love that.
You can take a listen, see if there's anything on there that is of any value.
2 other things come to mind. In I'm a Loser, what have I done to deserve such a fate, blah, blah, blah. There was a point in the song where you guys stuck the Tiger radio.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Roar. Tiger Roar?
No, it was just Tiger radio.
Yeah.
Just before, it was at the end of, I think, the middle 8 or the chorus, just before going back into another verse.
Yeah.
It was there every time.
Yeah. Why? Because back then, if you, as a radio station, had the new Beatles single before the Enemy did, you just bought about half their audience. So what we would do, if we had one first, to prevent them from taping it off our air and playing it on theirs, which is against the law, but they did it anyway, is put QAM exclusive or Tiger Radio all through the song, so that if they did tape it and played it back, it was obvious that they got it from us. And
the other thing that I remember was how, when you were signing on, and go, wonderful WQAM. But it started out, swing.
He's a happy guy. And it was a jingle. I got the jingles here someplace. It's a happy guy jingle. And there's a place right at the end where it goes, so like, and then you hit the echo button while all that's happening.
But I just love the way that over the months, when you started, wonderful, WQAM, swing, whoa. And it became a hard call.
Yeah, right, Well, it was like that. R-I-C-K, remember that?
R-I-C-K.
Exactly. It was the dumbest thing in the world, but it caught on. Kids remembered it. They latched onto it. It became part. Ricky Ticky. Somebody started, it was at IoT, some girl called up, hey, Ricky Ticky, how you doing? And after that, everybody started with the Ricky Ticky. Same thing with the hat. Okay, I've been wearing this Greek sailor's hat for 9 years, I guess now. One of our sales guys back then went to a nautical flea market, and there was a guy there with nautical caps. One of them was a Greek fisherman. Long story short, the guy bought it, gave it to me. It was my size, and it was back in the old days when Channel 2 used to do an auction to raise money for their annual budget. It just happened to be that when he came in that Monday morning, gave me the hat, I was on the auction that Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night. I said, Roland, thanks a lot. I'll wear it on the auction. Turn it on tonight, Channel 2. I'm going to be on the auction. So I was for 3 nights in a row. Every place I went, people would say, where's that hat you were wearing on Channel 2? Well, I've been doing this long enough to know if the folks want me to wear a hat, by golly, I am going to wear a hat. And it's been part of the uniform ever since.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we better probably wind it up. I know you have things to do. I screwed up and I didn't bring my camera. It's downstairs in the car. Can I run down and get it?
Sure.
Come up and take
Yeah.
a pic?
Yeah.
With that in the background.
Sure.
Perfect.
There you go. No problem. The big stainless steel call letters were on the side of the building. Sold them to Joe's Diner over here. He's got them hanging on the wall. He made a donation to the Views kids. And this was in the mailroom. These were the call letters hanging over the mailroom. Got those.
I see a Beatles poster there.
Yeah, that's from the Beatlemania thing that they had, about 6-7 years ago at the Omni downtown.
Yeah, Hard Day's Night. I went to see that at the 79th Street Theater.
Yeah, that's where I was. At the one that's now a nudie theater?
Yeah. Couldn't hear a damn thing.
Oh, yeah, right.
It was cacophony. I said, forget this. I left and went back and saw it later.
Cartoons and a preview, all the previews before the movie. And the kids didn't want to know about that. They wanted to see the Beatles now. Don't show me no previews. Don't show me no cartoon. They were rushing the stage, which is where I was, and I had nowhere to go. You know, I'm standing up there with the screen behind me, and, craziness. Crazy.
I'll be right back up
Okay.
then. Real good. This one?
Yeah, take it right, that'll put you in the wall.
Okay. And
Good luck to you.
I'll be in touch as
All
far
right.
as the video and the...
Yeah, okay, just give me a blank,
reel.
I'll be happy to run you a copy.
Pleasure.
Okay, we'll see you again. Take care.
Take it easy.
Have a good one.
You too. Classique. Thank you. So everything else good? It was a great interview. Get a receipt? I don't need a receipt. This is my receipt right here. Put staple right on your... This is my receipt right here. And the photos. Hey, that's all the proof I need.